Powered by GoGoat Sports in partnership with TSN. This is episode 30, season 4 of the Dregs Hockey Podcast, and it is presented by our title sponsor, Canadian Club Whiskey. We've got Dave Nonis, who's a repeat customer here on the Dregs Podcast, former NHL general manager. We call him our NHL front office insider, Ray, Dave Nonis, joining us again. And he's got an interesting perspective because it feels, I don't know how it feels like to you, but, and I mean, you live in a home with a front office executive. So whether you get this sense or not, it always feels to me in my side of the business, you get into January, turn the page on the calendar, you're looking at the second half of the regular season, and things start to intensify, right? Because, you know, you look at the bottom third of the NHL and you can say, okay, well, those guys inevitably are probably going to be sellers. Right. Buyers, we're not so sure yet. And we don't know what the sellers are in terms of the entire list yet either. But there does seem to be, when you get into January, at least a heightened level of intensity and urgency around the league.
Without question, the players feel it too. You know, like as they get into January here, they all know that the deadline's creeping up, and they start thinking about it a little bit, talk about it a little bit more. One thing I have in my mind here, Dregs, is about those sellers at the bottom.
Yeah.
Given the way the cap is and everybody's so tight, what if those sellers become a seller, but then a buyer, where they give nothing back,
right?
Virtually nothing back to a good team that's looking to move a contract because they want to bring somebody different in.
Mm-hmm.
And so what if you get a legit NHL player for a 7th round draft pick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I think that's more possible this year than in the past.
And is a lot of that cap related?
I think it's all cap related. If you're say you're heavy on forwards and you're like, man, we got to find a D. You're a good team. We need to find a D, or we've got to, maybe there's an injury, a key injury between now and then about a goaltender, and you've got to readjust the way you think. Well, maybe the only way to do it, because that goalie or that defenseman that gets hurt is not out for the rest of the year. He's only out for 3 weeks.
Right.
Well, now you got to do something. You've got to cap move something, and you might have to pay a price that you don't want to pay.
Yeah.
And so you just give the player away so you can adjust your mindset. I'm talking about teams that are good, that are trying to win, that may need to add something else. This might be the only way they can do it.
Right. And as we'll talk about in headlines presented by Boston Pizza, you've got a number of teams that, you know, are dealing with injury, and that's just a part of the game. It does feel this year like it's just been more difficult to manage than it has in past years. We'll get to that, but because we're recording here Thursday afternoon, we obviously have to stay away from the old gold medal game of the World Junior Championship, which is unfortunate. It'll be a good game. We'll revisit on Tuesday in episode 31. But I am looking from you for a general thought, and you know, we'll talk to Dave Nonis about this too from a management perspective. But how much stock do you think the performances of these kids is put in how that might translate or relate to what type of pro they're going to be, what type of NHL player they're going to be? Or is it just unfair? They're playing peer-to-peer on a world stage, best on best in their age category, but how can you possibly know what they're going to be like against 25-year-old, 30, 35-year-old men?
I think there's too much from the public, like from the fans, from the media, whether a player is good or bad in this tournament. I did 12 of them, and I saw wild swings of players that you were certain were going to be a really good player at the pro level, and they just weren't. And then players that struggled in this tournament and turned out to be everything that you thought they were going to be, or that you had read about, but they just weren't in that 2 weeks. Like I tell people often, you know, the first time I saw Nate McKinnon play, he was wearing a cage and he looked like a fish out of water. These guys were too fast. And when you think of Nate now, Like, that doesn't even seem possible.
I know.
Remember Connor McDavid? The tournament in Toronto, man, he was so nervous and trying so hard, and he scored a goal late in the tournament, and it was his first. And I remember saying they had a great close up. Our camera guys and the directors, they just nailed this shot of McDavid, and I remember just saying, "Now breathe." Yeah. Like, for the first time, he could exhale. And then you saw what Connor McDavid was, but prior to that, he was a nervous teenager. So I think too much. And I also think that the undrafted players, there's such focus on them, Dregs, and where they might go in the draft. What if a guy has a terrible 2 weeks and a great 7 months? Yeah. How are you going to weigh that? To me, the 7 months outweighs the 2 weeks.
Yeah. We collectively, as a hockey society, fans included, put so much pressure on these young players because we're watching them on the world stage. But, then you look in the NHL, and I'm thinking specifically here, the Montreal Canadiens. And of late, they've been in a bad funk. There's talk, and good reason to talk about it. Your Slafkovsky, some of their other young defensemen, players that are likely headed to the American League and headed to Laval if the Montreal Canadiens can't turn it around. This isn't an indictment on these young players. What it is a recognition of how difficult it is to develop at the NHL level, and the fact that there's nothing wrong with putting them in the AHL. A better environment, maybe more competitive for where they're at developmentally. So doesn't it feel like we need to look at that differently, again, as a hockey society, if we see Slafkovsky, first pick overall, sent to the American Hockey League at the midway point or past the midway point of the regular season?
The word fan comes from fanatic.
Sure.
And so, it's just not possible. Like, a good many people will understand the pumping of the brakes, and that a player needs to take a step back. A lot will view it as that the player's not good enough. And depending on the way that player has played up until that point, will determine a lot of that public view of a youngster being sent to the American League. Now, I actually am in favor of it. I'm in favor of Shane Wright going back to junior. I don't think he needs to go to Seattle and play 7 minutes a game in the games he gets in. I think he needs to play. I think he needs to develop. Here's the other thing, Dregs. If you're playing in Montreal and you're one of those young guys and you make a turnover in a 3-3 game and it ends up in the net, that thing's all over the internet. It's all over articles. It's all over the video and the highlights. And then he does it in the American League, same thing, same turnover, same result. Nobody knows. Nobody cares because it's a developmental league. And that's exactly what those kids need. Sometimes a step back out of the pressure, out of the limelight, into more minutes, into more meaningful minutes is absolutely the way to go. I'm in favor of it. Any of those kids that get sent back by Montreal or some other team that has young guys that may go down, I don't think there's an issue with it at all.
Agreed. Okay, the other side of the spectrum. So I had a conversation earlier this week with Pat Brisson, who represents Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, the Chicago Blackhawks. And, we've speculated on this in the media for months, dating back to the offseason last year, probably. When is it right to trade Kane and Toews? And Pat admitted, look, I've got to engage in serious conversation with both those players. They're not necessarily chasing cups. They each have 3 Stanley Cups. A 4th would be nice. Who doesn't want to win 4 Stanley Cups? But he itemized it this way for me, for insider trading. Number one, both those guys have to decide, do they want to be traded? Do they want to be traded? And then number 2, and we're still, again, as we approach the midpoint of the season, do you know with certainty, aside from the top of the division, top of the conferences, who the top contenders are? Well, maybe those 2 guys need a little bit more time to see if a team that fits them more geographically, in fact, could be a contending team. So that kind of fits into the decision-making. And then thirdly, Do you accept the trade and go into free agency this summer? Or if it's a really nice fit and all the bases are covered, do you do the trade and sign? So those are the three things that Brisson is going to wrestle with Kane and Toews on. I mean, it doesn't sound like much unless you're that player, Ray, who in Kane and Toews' case, who have played their entire career with one organization in Chicago. It becomes more complicated, more emotional.
Well, it becomes more complicated, but it also becomes what that player feels is the goal. Is it to try and win again? Does he have a couple of really good buddies on a particular team? Is he more comfortable going to team A than team B? Is a team that he wants to go to really just kind of an okay team, or are they a really good team? Yeah. All that stuff will play in. I just know as I got older and playing on teams that were in the rebuild phase, it stinks. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't have 3 cups in my pocket, so maybe I would have thought of it a little different. Right. I'm playing at that time and going, this is really crappy. We're out of the playoffs. I mean, not mathematically, but we're out of the playoffs already. Now what?
All right, you and Cammie and family spent some time in Seattle recently, right?
We did. We spent 4 days down there. Happy birthday to Riley, 16th birthday, and did a couple of games where the Kraken. I'll tell you, the building was alive. Dregs. There's some belief there.
So that feeds in perfectly with what I'm going to bring up here. I mean, this is a legitimate playoff contending team. Like legit. Dave Axtell seems to be doing a good job. The players are responding. They've had their share of success this year. You also know Ron Francis very well, general manager Ron. Exceptionally conservative GM for the most part. I think when you look at the body of the work in Carolina, he was a conservative dude. That's just who he is by nature. Should we expect him to try and bolster the Kraken's lineup? To further encourage a playoff push because of what you said. I mean, I don't know that he feels like he owes anything to the fan base, but it would be cool to see that team in the playoffs.
Well, they spent $600 million on the team. They spent $1 billion on the arena. They spent a couple $100 million on the American League facility, which by all accounts is just a gorgeous place. A couple of playoff games might be kind of nice. Maybe the owner would like a couple of playoff games. But I do not see, Dregs, an exorbitant cost being paid by Seattle for anybody. I just don't. I look at their center ice position and I think, you know what, maybe a veteran center that's on an expiring contract might be of interest there. Matty Beniers is their number one guy. The kid's 20 years old. Yeah. He gets out there, he goes and takes a face-off against a 29-year-old. He gets his clock cleaned because he's just such a young player and he's so good. Oh, he's so fun to watch. The people have really taken to him, but I could see that. I could see that. I just do not see the Kraken paying a really great price, like a high price for anybody.
All right, those are your headlines. Thank you one more time to Boston Pizza. And as always, our interviews on Ray and Dregs this year brought to you by Canadian Club Whiskey, who are asking, are you over beer? Why not try a refreshing CC ginger ale? Throw in a lime, some lemon next time you're having a drink or watching a game. And we'd like to raise a glass of the fine Chronicles series Canadian Club to Dave Nonis for joining us again today. Thank you, Dave. Presented by our good pals at Canadian Club. The final Chronicles series, the 45-year-old release, is now available everywhere.